All right, so today I want to talk about the Prince of Persia trilogy. So that would be The Sands of Time, Warrior Within, and The Two Thrones. Um, there's other Prince of Persia games I've played before. Like I've played the 2008 one, and that one's like a whole different character than the trilogy. And I've also played the Forgotten Sands, which is part of the trilogy story, but it came out like 5 years later when then the trilogy ended. And that one takes place between the first and second game. I've played the Forgotten Sands before, but like a long time ago. I forgot I even played it, to be honest, and I didn't really feel like playing it again. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about the base trilogy, especially since those were the three main ones I played recently. And I've also played a little bit of Warrior Within before. Someone let me borrow it when I was like younger, but I didn't get very far. I'd be like the first boss, which isn't very far into the game, and didn't really get past that. So, yeah, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time was pretty fun. I actually really enjoyed this game. I thought the gameplay was really good, and like the platforming was really fun. The combat's okay in this game. It's kind of like rock paper scissorsy in that you can either like attack, you can block, or you can counter attack. That's just kind of how the combat is in that game. The graphics in this game do look a little dated. Sometimes it's not that noticeable though, especially like when the camera zooms out. But the music's pretty good. Like the game's pretty fun overall. Like the platforming and the combat and stuff is fun. I think the game actually holds up really well. Like even though it's like 20 years later at least, you know. It's just like the graphical part is there. It's not that big of a deal, you know. I don't really care. Like the game is good. It's fun. That's what I really care about, you know. And this game is pretty like Sands of Time is pretty lighthearted. Some people say it has like an Arabian Nights feel to it, you know, and it's just about like the prince, you know, he gets a dagger, and then he like unleashes a bunch of sand monsters, and then he's like trying to undo what he just did. But yeah, I really enjoyed Sands of Time. It was a good time. I again, I think the gameplay holds up pretty well still. Definitely recommend trying it out. But I think they have a remaster of it coming out soon, so maybe that one would be better, probably more updated too. So Warrior Within, the second game, starts 7 years after Sands of Time happens, and there's like a major tone shift from Sands of Time to Warrior Within, where now the game is like super dark and edgy. Um, and it's kind of like a product of its time. Like this one is a lot of like it's like trying to be hardcore, and it's like bloody, and there's like a lot of sex appeal to it now too, you know. And you're like not even 2 minutes into the game and you just get ass in your face, you know. Overall, I feel like they took what they had, like the formula they had, and they really like expanded and improved on it, because in Warrior Within the combat is revamped, so it's not just blocking attack and countering attacking anymore. You can still do those things, but now you have two weapons, you can dual wield, you can steal an enemy's weapon, you can throw a weapon, you can jump over the enemy, attack them. Although I guess you could do that in the first one too, but you can like steal their weapon as you jump over them. um there's more like environmental attacks, right? Like you can bounce off walls, which I don't think you could do in the first one. I know for sure you can do it in the second one. And there's this attack where there's like a pole and your guy can like spin around it. The prince spins around and he attacks people, and you can do this with your primary or secondary attack with like any of these. The movement is also a little bit better too, because it's not just like wall running and climbing and like jumping. Like they took all the base mechanics from the first game and they added a few more to it. So now you can jump to a banner, use your dagger to slide down. You can jump to a rope on a wall that lets you like run back and forth using the rope and run from there. I feel like they did a good job like adding on to what you could do, and like especially the combat being reworked is really nice, because that's probably one of the more tedious parts of the first game. But now you just have so much variety. Like you can pick up different weapons and stuff. You can even get your own weapon upgraded, your main weapon, by doing like challenge levels. But yeah, way different tone than the first game. Like the first game's like pretty lighthearted. This game's like like dark, edgy, like hardcore. It's like the music in the second one is also like really good. It's like goes way harder. It's less like the Arabian Nights type feel, but more just like hard like rock, like metal and like shit while you're like fighting people or like doing boss fights or whatever. It's just this shit goes hard, dude. Like Warrior Within. I actually really liked Warrior Within. It's probably my favorite one out of the three. Just because they really went all out with it, dude. Like they did not hold back at all. And one thing I really liked about Warrior Within was that this game is set on the island of time, right? Because the prince is trying to get to the island of time to stop the sand of time from being created. And this has you traveling between the past and the present throughout the game. So, one really cool thing I like about this game is that it's kind of an open worldish, like you can explore different parts whenever if you can get access to it. But you go through the same world through the past and present, so it's the same map technically, but it's different depending on what time frame you are in, and that makes it for like it makes it pretty interesting, especially as you go in between and you like go through the story and stuff. um and I really appreciate that, I feel like that's not something that you see too often. Yeah, Warrior Within definitely feels like it's a product of its time. It came out in 2004, like 1 year after the first one. All right, so the Two Thrones I also actually really liked. So the Two Thrones is the same thing where it like takes what Warrior Within had and it expands and builds upon it a little bit more. So now like the Two Thrones in combat, it it has like stealth kills and it has like a few more sand powers you get. Because you get some sand powers in the second game, and you get some in the first one, but they're a little bit more in the second game. You get more in the third one, and in the Two Thrones, there's actually an alter ego for the prince you can play as, and he's like purple and stuff, and so he has different combat and movement abilities than the prince does. So like his combat, he uses his chain. Movement, he uses his chain. It's like a grapple hook for him, so that's like a new mechanic they add in. And like some new movement they add into the Two Thrones is like the spider slide where your guy's like holding between two walls and you slide down. Um, and there's like dagger inserts, so there's like little frames that you can put your dagger in to stay there and then use that to launch yourself somewhere else. Yeah, the Dark Prince like chain swings. And one cool thing about playing the Two Thrones, especially starting out, is playing this, you can kind of see like with the stealth kills and like the movement and stuff, it kind of feels like the building blocks for Assassin's Creed, like that's kind of what it turned into anyway, and you can really see like the DNA of this game like over time taking form to become what the Assassin's Creed games became also, which is really cool to see. Yeah, and the tone in the Two Thrones is in between the first game where it's like sometimes lighthearted and the second game where it's like super dark and edgy. So it's kind of in the middle, in between. Like there's a pretty big contrast between Sands of Time and Warrior Within's tone, and the Two Thrones kind of strikes a balance between them, where it's still like dark a little bit and like sometimes edgy and like serious at moments, but the prince is a little more like, he jokes around a little more. It's not like so serious all the time, It gets a little goofy, you feel me? Especially with like the prince and the dark prince, like they have some banter and like they have some banter with like Farah. And the prince in the Two Thrones feels a little more in line with the prince in Sands of Time. Because the Prince and Warrior Within feels very different than the Prince and Sands of Time. It's cool to see that he's a little more in line with the Sands of Time Prince. And I found out that probably the reason why this is, I was talking to a friend and he told me that so Sands of Time and the Two Thrones have the same voice actor for the Prince, whereas Warrior Within had a completely different voice actor. So I think that's probably part of it, where he's like more charismatic and like a little more enthusiastic about things. But Two Thrones a little more serious, but like and Warrior Within, he's like just he he's just like so serious all the time. Warrior Within, he's he's trying to get to the island of time and stop. He's being hunted by the Dahaka, which is a monster that's like hunting him for messing with the sands of time. And he's trying to get to the island of time to destroy the sands of time from being created so that the Dahaka doesn't hunt him anymore. And then in the third one, he's returning to Babylon or to his like father's kingdom, and like everything's gone to shit. And it turns out the vizier, who is one of the main enemies in the first game, is there like trying to take over, and he fucks shit up, and like the prince needs to kill him, and also deal with his other self, the Dark Prince. Warrior Within and the Two Thrones do have a little bit of a graphical improvement from Sands of Time. Still, these games are pretty old, so it still looks like dated, but it's honestly not that bad. Especially because these games came out in like 2003, 2004, 2005. Um, they're really old by today's standards, you know? You don't really see games come out back to back to back like that from the same studio anymore, which is kind of impressive to see that they were able to pull that off in that time. I think part of this is also because of like the way they like did their level design, especially in the second game where they get to reuse the same area like multiple times instead of like always creating new stuff. Also, these games are pretty hard actually. Like Sands of Time is like challenging. There are some hard parts, but most of it's not too bad. Like one part that was pretty difficult is this part where you have to fight. You're the prince and you have to fight his father in this like palace room, and Farrah's there to like help you, like she just barely helps you. But yeah, that part's kind of hard just because there's so many enemies you have to fight, and they're like, you die in like a few hits or so, and you only do so much damage. And then another hard part in Sands of Time is like there's this elevator sequence where you have to ride up an elevator, and then enemies come at you when you're on the elevator. But while you're there, you have to protect Farrah. If Farrah dies, you lose. So it's kind of hard to keep her alive, but eventually I pulled it off. In Warrior Within, I feel like the game's a lot harder actually. Like the combat's a lot harder to deal with. And like the bosses are harder too. They're like almost every boss was like kind of a little bit of a wall for me, I had to get used to them, and it's kind of like a little more Dark Souls like in a way, you have to fight them a few times and most of them and figure out like how they work. And the Two Thrones too. The Two Thrones keeps up the difficulty where like most of the bosses are like pretty hard. Like the mobs can be difficult at times, but they're not usually that bad, especially with the stealth kills in the Two Thrones. Even though the Warrior Within and the Two Thrones are a little bit more difficult, it's not too bad because the game gives you more tools and equipment to like deal with your enemies, like in Warrior Within, like you can get your sword upgraded, do more damage, stuff like that, and you get more like um upgrades as you play. Yeah, actually really I had a blast playing through these. They're really fun. um and like gameplay wise, they don't feel very dated. I think they all hold up really well, like even today, for a game. Like they're still really fun. It's just graphically that they look a little dated. um but otherwise they're still great games. And I know they're remastering Sands of Time. Hopefully they remaster the other two also. That'd be kind of sick. Oh, one thing too that I want to talk about is that these games are really old, so like 2003, 2004, 2005. um so they don't run great on modern computers. Like if you have over 60, actually it might be 59 frames, then the game is kind of whack. Like I was playing the first one without any like modifications to the game or whatever, and like sometimes it was like so slow, sometimes it was just way too fast, like the cutscenes were way too fast, and like the hit reg was off. So if you do end up wanting to play these games, there's like Steam guides on stuff on this, but you need to get like a patcher for like all three of them for them to run smoothly and work on modern systems just because of how old they are. All right, now I kind of want to get into the story of these games. There's a lot to cover, so I'm gonna try my best. I might miss some things. I might mess up some things or be confusing about some things. But if you guys want to, I watched this video by Marushca called "The Story of Prince of Persia." I watched the trilogy one. to help me recap the story a little bit since it's been a while since I played. And he does a really good job of explaining this story. I'm gonna try my best as well, but we'll see. So spoiler warning ahead if anyone cares. Um, and yeah, so in the Sands of Time, when the game starts, the Persians, the king of Persia, is doing an attack on an Indian kingdom, the kingdom of the Maharaja. And so, just do a little introduction before the events of the first game. There's a Maharaja who's the ruler of the Indian kingdom. He hears about these like relics of time or whatever, and he goes to the island of time. And while he's at the island of time, he finds the hourglass of time, he finds the scepter of time, the amulet of time, and the dagger of time, and also a secret fifth object, which I will explain later when it comes to the second game as you find out what that is. But basically, the Maharaja takes all these relics back to his kingdom. He gives Farah, his daughter, the amulet of time, and he gives his vizier, his advisor, the scepter of time. Okay. So they have the hourglass, and then there's a dagger of time also as kingdom. So apparently, the vizier, knowing about these things, he gets power hungry and wants more. So he goes to the Persians, and tells them about these and gets the Persian king to attack. So he betrays the Maharaja and gets the Persian king to attack so they can take these relics back. And this is where the game starts. Okay, so the Persians attack the Maharaja in his kingdom, and the prince is here on his first battle, and to try and impress the king, his father, he goes off on his own and he finds the dagger of time. So he finds the dagger and then he brings it back with him. He shows his father and the vizier like what he found. And the vizier's like, "Give me that." And the prince is like, "No, like you can't have that." And then the king is like, "Just let him have it." And the vizier's like kind of pissed off, because the vizier wants the dagger. So they take the relics and some people they captured back to their kingdom, with the hourglass. And the vizier tricks the prince into putting the dagger into the hourglass. And when he does that, it turns everyone around them into sand monster. Okay, it it turns everyone into sand monsters. Everyone except the the vizier, the prince, and this lady that he saw captured who was wearing an amulet, who is Farah, the Maharaja's daughter. So everyone except them three get turned into sand monsters, and then the prince is trying to undo this. He's like pissed off, and so he goes to the palace. He's like trying to fight people. He has to fight his own father, and that's kind of when Farah's like, at first Farah's like, "What the hell? Like I don't like trust you. Like you guys invaded me." Um, but then she sees that the prince is trying to fight these monsters, and they're both against like the same enemy. So that's when they start to regain each other's trust. And they go through the story a little bit. They're like after the vizier. Um, they they eventually get to the hourglass, and the vizier shows up, and he like blows them through a hole or something, and then they fall in this hole. And when they got to the hourglass, the prince had this like vision that Pharaoh was gonna steal the dagger, so he's kind of like not trustworthy of her. So they fall through this hole, together, and he gets knocked unconscious, and then he has dreams about having like sex with Farah. Um, and then he wakes up and he sees Farah's not there, and his dagger's gone. So Farah did steal the dagger. Um, so he kind of, their trust is kind of betrayed now. And he goes after Farah because he wants the dagger back, and he sees that she's like fighting some goons or whatever. And then as she's fighting them, they like knock her off, and she like falls down somewhere off a ledge, and they kill her. And the prince now has the dagger. He tries to save her by going back in time, but he can't do it. Like she's just perma dead. Like so, after Farah dies, the prince is like really mad. He takes a dagger to the hourglass. He puts it in the hourglass, and by doing this, he doesn't really care what happens. But what ends up happening is that everything that just happened gets reversed up to the point where like the war starts. So the prince goes back in time. He still has a dagger with him, but everything else did not happen. Like that's how far back they went in time, like before they even got the relics and stuff, and before they went to war. Okay, so after everything gets reset, the prince has the dagger still. He keeps the dagger, and then also his memories are still there, so he knows what's about to happen. He goes to Farah and gives her the dagger, and then warns her about the vizier betraying them. And then the vizier actually shows up, and you have like a final boss fight with the vizier. And then after you defeat him, you kind of prove yourself right. You're like vindicated a little bit, and Fear's like, oh, like, well, okay, I guess you're telling the truth. And then she's like, still, how do you know all this? And the prince is like, blah blah blah, like, don't worry about it. And then he like gives her a little kiss, and she's like, what the fuck? And then he like reverses time because he's like, oh shit, yeah, she doesn't know who I am. And then he's like, he doesn't give her a kiss this time. He just like tells her and warns her, and he's like, all right, bye. And then he has the sand medallion with him, and then he runs away. And then that's pretty much the end of the first game. So yeah. So the second game, Warrior Within, is where things start to get a little crazy. This game starts off with the prince running away from something, and they don't really show you what it is. But he's running away in like an alley. He gets cornered, and then the scene switches to like him being on a ship in like super stormy like waters. Um, and then they get attacked by another ship out of nowhere. And then so the attackers are shooting bows and stuff, and they're trying to like board their ship. And this is like not even like 3 minutes into the game. It shows like some of the attackers are like kind of sand monsters and stuff. And then this lady walks out from under the deck. And when she walks out, it's just full ass cheeks in your face, dude. She just walks out right in your face. You haven't even started the game yet, really. And she's wearing this like super like skimpy armor, which is crazy. And the scene is actually one of the parts I remember from when I played when I was like uh, a kid. Not a kid, but I was like a teen or preteen or whatever. Yeah, the scene probably did irreversible damage to my taste in woman. But anyways, she walks up and she's like smiling and shit. And then after that, she's like, kill him. And then, so the sand monsters and her board, and they try and kill you, and you have to like fight through them. And then, as you're going through the ship, at the end, you fight the lady. Her name is Shoddy. Um, and you fight Shoddy. She's kind of hard to fight, but not like super hard. At least not yet. So after you beat her, the ship sinks, and then uh like the prince gets washed up. But between him, like the ship sinking and the him getting like washed up on a shore, he has a little like flashback scene where he's talking to like the seer, asking what he can do because he's being hunted by a beast, right? And the seer's like, oh, you have to go to the island of time, to stop the sands of time from ever being created because the beast is hunting him because he's been messing with the sands of time. So, yeah, that happens. And then you go back to the present, and the prince is washed up on a shore, and he's now found the island of time. And he goes through, and he finds Shoddy, and he starts following her. And she enters through this portal, and then you go through the portal, and it turns out the portal takes you back through time. So now the prince is in the past, and he's trying to follow Shoddy and see what she knows or whatever. And then you come up on Shoddy fighting another lady. The scene is crazy. Like the shots they have in this game are like insane sometimes. There's like, whoa, how do they get away with that? It's a different time, man. It's a different time. Anyways, Shoddy is fighting this other lady who's in a red dress, and like the first shot is like of just their legs, and they're like grunting and moaning and stuff. It's like kind of weird a little bit at first, but anyways, they're fighting, and Shadi's about to kill the other lady. Um, and the other lady's about to like fall off. So the prince gets involved because he's like, "Oh, the enemy of my enemy is my friend." And then you get to fight Shoddy here, and honestly, she beat my ass on this part. Like it was kind of hard to fight her, but then after you defeat her, you knock her on the ground. You try and save the other lady, and Shoddy's on the ground, and you like stab her. So you're running with the other lady, and Shoddy's like, "Oh, you can't escape your fate." And then the prince is like, "Oh, like is she talking to me? Like that was weird. Like what is she talking about?" And then they run away, and this new lady, the red dress lady, and the prince are talking. The prince is like, "Oh, I'm here to find the Empress of Time because he has to kill her to stop the sands of time from being created." The red dress lady's like, kind of whatever about him, and she leaves. She's like, "Oh, the Empress won't talk to you, you know?" You go through the story a little bit more, and then you find the red dress lady in the hourglass room. This time she's a little more friendly. She's like, "Oh, my name's Kylina," or whatever. And she like gives you a little sword, like an upgraded weapon. Um, and the prince is like, "I need to get to a throne room to find the Empress of Time." And she's like, "Well, if you want to get in the throne room, you gotta activate the two towers." And then so she sends you on a little quest to go through the two towers. So you go around trying to activate the two towers, and sometimes this involves you going back to the past or the present, because Kylina and Shadi are in the past, and the prince they can travel to the present too, I guess. But the prince is from the present, so sometimes you have to go back and forth, and the environment's a little different, like I mentioned earlier. Um, and usually in the present, the Dahaka comes after you, and he's like this crazy beast, and he chases you down. You can't hurt him, but his only weakness is water. So you have to get somewhere, usually like a save room or something, where there's water. Usually like the time portal rooms. Also, sometimes when you go through the map, you see this creature who looks kind of funky. Um, it doesn't quite look like the other monsters, but he is not normal. It's like a sand wraith. Um, and he's kind of stalking you the whole time, and you're like, "Whoa, like that guy's kind of weird, bro. Like, what is he doing here?" Um, it's unclear, like what's going on with him. But you just see him every now and again. You activate the two towers. You go back to Kylina, and then you've opened the throne room now, and you go in there, and then it turns out she is the Empress of Time. Like, oh, who would have known, you know? And you're like, what? And then you have to like kill her. So then the prince kills her. The prince kills Kylina, and then she explodes into a bunch of sand, and the prince is like, "Finally, I've stopped the sands of time from being created." And he's like, "Oh, finally the Haka will stop hunting me." But then right as he says that, he sees the Dahaka is still there going after him, and he's like, "What? This can't happen. Like, I destroyed it. Like, what do you mean?" So the prince is trying to get off the island of time because he's like, "Oh, I killed Kylina, stop the sands of time from being created." But the Dahaka is still after him. Now that the Dahaka is still after the prince, he realizes something is wrong, and then he remembers that when he killed Kylina, there's a big explosion of sand, and that by killing her, he actually created the sands of time. So her dying is what creates the sands of time, and that's when he's kind of like, "Oh shit, like this is what's already happened and what I've done already, you know?" Yeah, this is how he realizes like he's already done what he's doing right now, and he needs to do something different. So then I think he goes to like the you go to the throne room or something, but you like find this like secret room behind the throne room, and you find the secret fifth artifact that I was talking about earlier, with the other like time relics. And this is the Mask of the Wraith. When he finds the Mask of the Wraith, there's a writing on the wall from the Maharaja who found this before, and like they escaped their death from using the mask. It's kind of like a little warning, but the Maharaja like left it there because he knew it was really dangerous. So the prince takes this mask, he puts it on, and then he turns on to into the Sand Wraith, and he realizes that the creature that he's been seeing the whole time is like himself. So I forgot to mention this earlier, but just before you go to fight Kylina in the throne room, the Dahaka comes after you and he tries to kill you, but the Sand Wraith is behind you and he ends up killing the Sand Wraith. And you're like, whoa, that was crazy. Like, it's a little weird. Now, the Prince is a Sand Wraith, and the mechanics here are a little different where, like, the Sand Wraith is regenerating sand the whole time but is losing health until they kill enemies. So now you go through the map as a Sand Wraith. It puts you, how the mask works is you put it on and it lets you go back to that timeline but as a different person. So he's not the prince because there can't be two of the same person in the same timeline. Now he's the Sand Wraith, and there's also a prince in his timeline that's not the person you're playing as. You go back in time and you kind of see like the prince's journey a little bit throughout. And this is where you stumble upon Kylina and Shoddy talking. This is just before you come up on them fighting. But now you see them as a Sand Wraith and you get more context to the conversation. This is where you find out that Shoddy actually works for Kylina, and Kylina had ordered her to kill the prince, and then Shoddy didn't manage to kill the prince. She failed, so Kylina was like, I'm gonna kill you for failing, and that's why they started to get into a fight. And then that's when you realize that when Shoddy gets killed, and she's like, you can't change your fate. She's actually talking to Kylina, who was also trying to change her fate, because just like the prince is trying to change her fate, Kylina was too. She didn't want to die, just like how the prince didn't want to get hunted by the beast. Yeah, anyway, you go through and then you like there's like a little scene where the Sand Wraith like throws an axe at the prince. And when you're the prince, you're like, whoa, he almost hit me. But as a Sand Wraith, you're like, oh shit, he hit an enemy like behind the prince. Like he's actually trying to save the prince. And the reason you need to follow the prince a little bit is because you need to wait for the two towers to open. Um, as the Sand Wraith, you like get in a little accident. One of the big monsters comes and he like knocks you out, and then you're like, oh shit. And then you go see that the prince has already activated the two towers. Now the prince is in front of the Dahaka again, just before the throne room, and you are the Sand Wraith behind him. And because you know what's about to happen, you like are able to dodge the Dahaka, and the Dahaka gets the prince, and the prince dies. Okay, and so when the prince dies, that makes it so that the Sand Wraith can take off his mask, and now the Sand Wraith, who was the prince from the present, or like the prince we played as, is now in this timeline, and he takes the place of this other prince who just died. So until the way the Sand Wraith mask works is that until they're the same, because there can be two of the same person, until one of them dies, the Sand Wraith can't take off the mask. So now we have the prince in this other timeline just before he goes to fight Kylina, and he took place of the other dead prince. And his goal now is to, instead of fighting Kylina in the past, he's trying to get her to the present, to kill her in the present. So you go and you fight her in the throne room a little bit, but you're like not trying to actually fight her. And the prince ends up like leading her to the portal, and she knows what you're up to. She's like, you can't get me, but the prince ends up like slowing down time and like throwing her in the portal to the present. And then this is where like the final like boss fight is of Warrior Within. And there's two things that can happen here depending on how you played the game. So there's two endings and two boss fights. So if you got the water sword, if you got all the upgrades and ended up getting the water sword, you get a different ending. If you don't have the water sword, then you get to the final area, you fight Kylina, you kill her, and then what ends up happening is the sands are no longer created in the past, which means the prince never got to use them. They're now in the future. So the Dahaka is no longer after him. The Dahaka shows up still, and the prince is like, what the fuck? And the Dahaka is actually after Kylina now. He takes Kylina and then like takes her back in time or whatever, because apparently she's not supposed to be in the present. The Dahaka leaves the prince alone because he was able to change his fate. But if you have the water sword, then this is the canon ending. So the other ending is non-canon. The canon ending is this one with the water sword. So you get Kylina to the present, and then the prince is like, oh, like the Dahaka can't get us here because the sands never got created. But it turns out the Dahaka still shows up, but instead of going for the prince now, he's going after Kylina because Kylina isn't supposed to be in that timeline, whereas before he's going after the prince for like messing with the sands and like being in the wrong timelines. Now he's going after Kylina. So then the prince and Kylina team up to start fighting the Dahaka because they find out like the water sword actually hurts the Dahaka. And then they defeat the Dahaka, and then they're like, "Oh, we did it! We escaped our fate! Like they both got to live." And then the prince is like, "Oh, why don't you come with me to Babylon?" Um, and then the prince and Kylina go on a ship to Babylon, and they have a crazy scene. It shows like a crazy like sex scene right there. Um, it's not like super visual, but you know what's going on for sure. Um, and then at the end, it shows a little scene of Babylon where it's on fire, and there's a guy who picks up the crown. And he's like, "What's yours is mine," and like Babylon's going to shit. And that's kind of where Warrior Within ends. And then the third game, the Two Thrones, is also pretty wild. In the Two Thrones, it picks up right where the second game leaves. So the prince and Kylina are on a ship, and Babylon's like in ruins. And they get to Babylon, so they're on their ship. They see Babylon's like all fucked up and on fire and shit. And they're like, "What the fuck?" And then they land, and almost immediately, Kylina gets taken prisoner by the raiders or whoever's like attacking them. Um, and then you go try and save her, and you're like trying to follow her and stuff. And then you find out that the vizier is after all this because, as it turns out, because none of that other stuff happened since he like went back and stuff, the vizier still knew about the things of time, like the relics of time. And the vizier, so they kidnap Kylina, and then the vizier, the prince is going after them, and the vizier has her on like this sacrificial altar, and the prince is going after him, and the vizier has like his goons or whatever, and one of them like throws a chain into onto the prince's arm, and the prince is kind of like struggling, he can't really do anything, and then the vizier ends up stabbing Kylina with the dagger of time, because he was able to get his hands on some of the relics still since he knew they were still around. So he stabs Kylina with the dagger of time, and then again, Kylina explodes into a bunch of sand, causing sands of time to be created again, and the sands also go in the dagger. And then the vizier ends up stabbing himself with the dagger, causing, because he wants immortality, so apparently that makes him immortal, so he starts mutating and shit, and he turns into this like crazy monster, and it also turns everyone around like in the sacrificial area like into like, it gives them like crazy like sand mutant powers too, including the prince, who like the prince ends up absorbing that like chain that's around his hand, and he ends up getting an alter ego like the dark prince, and he turns like purple and shit. So after the vizier stabs himself, like there's a big sand explosion or whatever, a bunch of sand everywhere. The ground starts falling. The prince gets free. He starts chasing after the dagger. Falls in a hole, and he wakes up and he finds out that he has his alter ego, the Dark Prince. And it's cool when he plays the Dark Prince. Is like slightly different mechanics too. Like it's kind of like the Sand Wraith, where he's like losing health all the time but gaining sand all the time. So you gotta like fight monsters and like find water and stuff. But yeah, you go through the game, and at some point you like see Farah, and Farah's kind of like pissed off because she still got like taken from her land or whatever. But I think she has the medallion, so she was okay. So the only way for the prince or to turn back to his normal self from the Dark Prince is to step in water. Apparently, the reason that the vizier knew the relics of time still existed is because the Maharaja still went to the island of time. But they found like an empty hourglass and like the dagger and scepter, but they didn't find the other stuff. And then they like went back, and the vizier was like not satisfied with that, so he ended up invading Babylon and like the Persian kingdom. And also once now that like Kylina's now that there's been like a huge sandblast off of Kylina's death in the sacrifice area, like pretty much the vizier's whole army is sand monsters now too, and his like main guys that were there with them are turned into stronger people, just like the prince did. They have like stronger versions. Like one of his like main goons like turn into a giant guy, and they serve as like the main bosses. The one's like a teleporting lady, like Ninja Lei. She's the one with the chain, and the other one's like the two guys like axe and sword. And you fight them later, and that fight was actually pretty hard. That one got me. But yeah, you go through the kingdom. You're trying to get to the vizier to kill him, and the Dark Prince is like much more like serious and focused on killing the 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 vizier, whereas the prince is still like fighting with himself to be like he's pretty focused on killing the vizier, but he also wants to like save people sometimes, which becomes a point of contention later. As you're going through the game, you actually end up encountering Farah again, except she doesn't know you anymore. So when the prince calls her, she's like, "Oh, Farah." She's like, "How do you know me?" And the prince is like, he like makes up a story or whatever. But they end up like trying to regain each other's trust, or the prince trying to gain her trust, because she doesn't really trust him for a little bit, and but they have the same enemy, so they work together. And then you get to a point where you are the prince is like conflicted between saving people because he hears them screaming and going after the vizier, and he's like, oh, I don't know if I should save people, go after the vizier. And the Dark Prince is like, oh, you should go after the vizier, like he's number one priority. And Fair's like, we gotta go save people. The Dark Prince, you don't the Dark Prince usually talks to the prince in his head, so like externally they don't really see that conversation happening unless he's like transformed, in which case they still talk to each other in their head, but visually there's a visual difference, but when they talk to each other there's a difference, like external difference. But yeah, the Dark Prince says to go for the vizier, and Fair's like, we gotta save the people. And then the prince tries to go for the vizier because the Dark Prince told him, and the Fair's like you suck, like you're no prince of your people, like you don't care about your people at all. And then the prince kind of takes that personally. He's like, oh fuck, I should have gone and saved those people. So you end up going and saving the people. And then it ends up being pretty it ends up being a good idea because after you save the people, the prince has to go after the vizier, but there's just an army of sand monsters. And then the prince is like, what do I do? The prince and Farah are like, we can't do anything. And then all the people he saved, one of them is the seer, by the way. The seer that you see in the second game, who like tells him is to go to the island of time. All the people show up, and the seer's like, oh, it's the Prince of Persia. And then all those people like end up fighting the sand monsters, and then the prince is like, you can't kill them. And then the seer's like, it's okay, we don't need to, we just need time to like to stall and stuff. And then so the prince is like, okay. And then he starts running after the vizier, and I think he's chasing after the vizier, and then this is where like the vizier collapses something, so the prince ends up falling in a hole. And then when he's in the hole, he finds his father's body. So he finds out his father's dead, and he's like, no. And then the Dark Prince starts mocking him a little bit. I think the banter between Prince and Dark Prince is pretty fun sometimes. But the Dark Prince is mocking him. She's like, oh, like, oh, you're so sad. What did you expect? Like, why don't we just reverse time like you always do? And the prince is like, man, fuck you. And then this is the first time actually that the prince turns back into himself from the Dark Prince. Because all the other times you need to like find a water source to do that. But this is the first time he just does it out of like pure, emotion, and he regains control. So you go look for the vizier, and again he's like transformed. He's like a floating, like he's hella morphed, looks hella whack, and I guess he's like stolen Farah. He has Farah like tied up, like chained to something in like the final boss area. But before you get to the final boss area, this part's actually really cool because you're like climbing the Tower of Babylon. It's really awesome. It's super fun to play because you just see that you're going up higher and higher up the tower. Um, and then when you get to the top is where the arena is, where you fight the vizier. And so the vizier fight's pretty cool. You got to use like your environment to attack him and stuff because he's like flying around and shit. One cool thing about this is that when you show up, he has Farah tied up, like chained up somewhere, and the vizier's like mocking them, and Farah's like, "Come here, I want to talk to you," and then the vizier's like, "What do you want?" And then Farah spits on his face, which is pretty funny. Um, but yeah, you end up fighting him, and then he starts like ruining the environment and stuff, and like you have to like start jumping on these like floating things to like even attack him. And then you end up killing him, and then you're like, yes, like we did it. So after you kill the vizier, all the sands come back, and they end up forming Kylina, and Kylina's like, oh, like I gotta find another world because my place is not here. It's like her like sand spirit or whatever, and she ends up taking like the dagger of time and like sand relics with her, I guess. Um, and it also has like the people being like, hurrah, like we defeated the monsters. And then she also removes the prince's curse, so like the chain that's been on his arm falls off. Um, but and the prince ends up like trying to pick up the crown, but as it turns out, his monster, like the Dark Prince, is still there. So the Dark Prince comes back to haunt him, and this is where it gets absolutely insane. The Dark Prince says his line where he's like, "Oh, all that is yours is mine," that you see like at the end of the second game. He teleports you into this like environment that makes you feel like you're fucking tripping balls, dude. Like this shit's crazy. It feels like you're on a fucking acid trip or you're like having a fever dream or some shit, dude. But you like go around and he's like taunting you and stuff. He's like, "Oh, the crown is actually mine, like not yours." And he's like taunting, mocking you, and you go through this a little bit, and you're like trying to fight him, but he keeps disappearing. And then Farah shows up, and Farah's like, kind of like, oh, just like come with me, like don't worry about this guy. So the prince ends up going with Farah, and he starts ignoring the Dark Prince, and that's kind of the Dark Prince's weakness. That's how he gets the Dark Prince to go away. So Farah kind of arrests the idea of Farah. I don't think Farah's actually in that like fucking dream or like fever dream of his. Um, but you end up following Farah up these like stairs and then like escaping, and the Dark Prince is like, no, because you're ignoring him now, and he doesn't have any more power over you. And then this is where like the prince starts telling Pharaoh's story again, and then he says this famous line, and it shows him on top of the Tower of Babylon. He says this famous line that he says in the first Prince of Persia game at the beginning and the end. He's like, most people think time is like a river, but no, it's actually like an ocean. And yeah, that's where it ends. Good stuff. Hopefully, you guys understood at least some of that. I was trying to convey it as best as I could. Um, yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace out.